on the Commission for Women, we act as advocates for all of the concerns for women in Dade County, and we try to see what issues affect them. And of course, domestic violence is a very big issue. It affects women at all levels, economic levels, all ethnicities. Even, you know, when you look at somebody, you can't tell that they're a victim until they start talking. And when they start talking, that's when everything comes out, and you say, oh, no, 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 that couldn't be possible. Yes, it is. It could be your neighbor. It could be a friend. You know, it could be a relative. And when we look at one of the things that happens is we try to say, you need to get away from that relationship. When you're in an abusive relationship, you need to get away. And how do they get away? It's not easy. It is the most hardest, it is the most dangerous situation that somebody can be in trying to get away from an abusive relationship, because one of the things they say is if I can't have you, nobody will. So this is a time that they're the most vulnerable and the most needy. They have families they have to support. They have jobs. And where's the first place that a perpetrator's going to go to look for them after they've left the home? They go to the job. And then you have that person ends up being in danger, and their co-workers also end up being in danger. You know, we see it all the time. You open the newspaper, you watch TV, and you see that somebody has gone to somebody's work and attacked the person, attacked the co-workers. We need to make sure that there is some way for them to maintain their economic status, because the spouse that they were dependent on is no longer there to provide financial support. And the job, they may have to quit that job to be able to go into hiding, to be able to go into a shelter and get away from that relationship. And they don't want to have a place where the offender can find them. So if it comes down to making our elected officials aware of this matter, that perhaps a domestic violence victim needs to be eligible for something like unemployment compensation. This is something that, you know, when you look at the facts and you look at what happens, it's not just for that person, it's for everybody else around them, because a perpetrator isn't going to stop with just the victim. They're going to try to get anybody in their way. So we need to make sure that economic status isn't an obstacle for the victim that is trying to get away from that abusive relationship.
Women's Fund is an organization that has been in Miami-Dade for 20 years. We'll have our 20th anniversary this year, and we have been working on all issues that impact women and girls in Miami-Dade. And freedom of violence, domestic violence was one of the first issues that we've been working on, and we've been including it in the issues that we work on ever since, because it is so important and so pervasive. And we fund Sisters of Survivors for the work that they're doing in empowering the survivors to not only learn to speak up for themselves and to get the word out, because, as Grace said so eloquently, community awareness is important. It's important to know that this could be happening to anybody that's part of your life, and you may not even know it. So it's important for these women to be able to speak up. But as we've learned from Sisters of Survivors' work, it's also important for them to organize the survivors and have them come together and discuss among themselves what are the issues, what are the solutions, because one thing that we like to fund is solutions to the problems that have been identified. And the women who themselves have experienced this situation identified that unemployment compensation is an important solution for their situation, because, as Grace said so eloquently, the person is going to come to find them, and he's going to come to their job. And not only are they in danger there, but their coworkers are in danger. And they cannot not go to work if they have children and themselves whose very survival depends on that paycheck. So if they cannot have unemployment compensation, they have no alternative. That's why it's such an important solution.
Karen Gray Grabowski, I hope I pronounced it right. She is a member of Sisterhood of Survivors, a survivor of domestic violence, and an incredibly courageous woman who's going to share her insight of this epidemic and how to work together to solve it.
Thank you, Sabrina. Staying in a relationship for economic security. When you hear that, what do you think of? Somebody living in the projects, maybe somebody that's on food stamps. It's probably one of, probably a minority. I'm sure you don't think of it as a white woman employed by the United States federal government and as a computer systems analyst who stayed in a severely violent relationship for economic security. I am that woman, and it happened to me. We met in Pennsylvania, where we both worked for the government. It was 1976, and I had a good job. It was 40 hours a week, and I had benefits. I became pregnant, and then we married. He would occasionally hurt me, but I tried to make the best of it. It was rural Pennsylvania, and nobody talked about it. He received a promotion in California, so I couldn't survive on my income alone, and so I followed him. After 18 months in California with a black eye, a few nights before we were to leave for Arizona for another one of his promotions, I followed him because California had a high cost of living. While there, in Arizona, it was Colorado for another promotion. While there, I called a lawyer with the black eye because I couldn't afford his fee. And so, it was time to move to California, and so I went with him. While there, he promised me the world, and I had another baby. At the same time in my pregnancy, I received a promotion. It was an upward mobility position that now was going to increase my salary for the next 4 years in a row. Wow, I made it. After 2 years and quite a few beatings later, I left him, and I joined my family on the East Coast. My parents lived on a very simple income, and it was a strain giving 3 more family members some aid. Well, I returned back to California because he promised me again it would stop. It didn't take long, and it started happening again, more severe and more frequent. Even with 37 stitches to my lip, I didn't tell my family what was happening. I continued to stay employed while this violence was going on, because I had a good position with the government and I couldn't leave my job. You just can't quit your job because you're terribly unhappy and somebody is beating you up. What else was I supposed to do? I needed to contribute to the economic security of my family. I paid the rent and he paid the daycare. My children depended on our 2 incomes to survive, and then especially depended on my sole income when he resigned for the government and he became unemployed. When he worked part-time, he became the daycare. When he started working full-time, then he paid the daycare expense. I struggled with the rest. After a serious beating, I kicked him out of the house. The daycare then refused me services because he wasn't paying the daycare bill. The bill was high, and how was I supposed to go to work without daycare? How could I work? How was I supposed to provide for my children's security and for my well-being? I brought him back into the home. I felt as if I had no other choice. Well, 5 months and 4 intensive beatings to follow, I had him removed for the very last time. I pleaded with the daycare, and they agreed to help me with the promise that he was never to come back into my home again. I'm now divorced. I have a good job. I have the daycare, and now this violence would end. Well, it doesn't end. He now attempts to harass and bully me at work. He harasses my coworkers and my job for the next 2 years. These 2 years comprised of 34 more incidents, to include, but not limited to, stalking in 3 cities, coming to my house and breaking in my kitchen window and beating me up, death threats to my coworkers, death threats to my caregivers, attempts to sabotage my job. He was calling my work all the time. There was 8 more police reports filed with just as many arrests, and then he was jailed for stalking. Years ago, I had no other choice. I had nowhere to turn, and I had no security for my children. And I was feared of being homeless. I suffered thinking I could do this when I couldn't. I had nowhere to turn, no money, and if I left my job, I thought I could only hold on a little longer and try to save some money to finally leave him. I'm here to tell you that I thought wrong. There was no stopping him. Either I was going to kill him or he was going to kill me when he got out of jail. And so I was forced to leave my job. I sold all of my possessions except with a few of my children's toys, and we traveled 3,000 miles to the safety of my family. On another note, when he was arrested from jail, he had me arrested for felony counts of stealing the children, but that's another story. If I was able to have that economic security I needed for my children and myself, I would have never stayed. I saw no possibility of freedom and endured this brutalization only to resign in the end. How many more Karens are out there struggling like I did? How many more beatings can they endure? Sisterhood of Survivor members know that economic security is vital for victims of domestic violence to leave an abusive relationship and flee to safety with children in tow. I know, I had 2 sons. Unemployment compensation can help support these women who are being terrorized right in their homes, a place that you call safe. With a source of income separate from the abuser, they can find safety away from violence. We can stop this disease that's growing in epidemic proportions. We are the women of Florida. We are advocating for your mothers, your sisters, your aunts, your uncles, your neighbors, your teachers, and for all the Karens who are still being terrorized in their homes every day like I have. Sisterhood of Survivors would like to reaffirm our commitment to continue working towards exploring and finding solutions to end domestic violence. We believe that all institutions must work together for sound economic, social, health, and educational public policies, programs, and proposals for women and children affected by this. And remember this, as domestic violence ends, the violence is still continuing. It knows no end.
I'm both happy and sad to be here. I'm happy to be in the company of these amazing women who've come to my university numbers of times to educate our students and who lobby for policy changes that are so important, and the men who are their advocates with them. It's great to be here. On the other hand, I'm really sad to be here. I'm sad that we still have to be here. After decades of a domestic violence movement, we still have a long, long ways to go. What I wanted to emphasize today is that for too long we viewed domestic violence as an individual problem, one that an individual perpetrator does against an individual victim. And for too long, many of our institutions have failed to hold those abusers accountable and have even blamed victims for their own victimization. And we see this in criminal justice still, we see this in media, we see this in a number of institutions. This is not the right way to approach this problem, as you're hearing today. This is truly a community problem and therefore requires a community response, not an individual response. As you've heard today, domestic violence impacts people's coworkers, not just the victims, but the people they work with who may be harassed and targeted. It impacts our children who witness horrific abuse and are more likely to go into their schools and bully and hurt other people or not get the help they need and go on to be in abusive relationships themselves. It impacts our healthcare system. We know victims of domestic violence use emergency healthcare, for instance, 8 times more often than non-victims. These are just a few examples of how this is truly impacting our entire communities, and it requires us all to work together to find those appropriate solutions. And we do know these victims face huge barriers in trying to get safe, something we all have a fundamental human right to be in our houses and in our homes and in our environments and in our relationships. We know victims have a hard time leaving because of not just financial reasons, but a lot of financial reasons, coupled with their children and their legitimate fear of being attacked and followed and harassed further, like you heard from Karen. We know that victims face tremendous difficulties in, once they have left, not having to return to their abusers. And so statistics bear this out, that the average victim leaves 7 times before she's able to be gone for good. This is not okay, and this is something that we really need to continue to address. It's important to raise this issue not just with our elected officials, but with all of us, who then lobby those elected officials to make these very necessary public policy changes. I just want to end really quickly by applauding all the efforts of Sisterhood of Survivors for everything they've done so far for victims and the things they continue to do. We have a long, long way to go, but we are working on it with very courageous people around us.
You know, the mark of any culture is how they treat their families and their women. We have only to look around the world to see what's going on with women all over the world. The United States of America should be in the very forefront, and yet we do not have the laws to protect our women from times of domestic violence. I am committed to empowering all women throughout all parts of Florida. My district is in Palm Beach and Broward County, but my commitment is to women throughout the state of Florida. That what we need to do as women is to make our voices heard, like you're doing today. All the organizations, the Sisterhood of Survivors, the victims throughout the state of Florida, by making our voices heard, we will not be silenced anymore, because we need to be heard not only here in Miami-Dade, we need to be heard all the way up to Tallahassee. Every elected official needs to be put on notice that women, children, families, men will not stand anymore for the legislature not standing together with all of us. I'm telling you, there isn't a family in this state that has not been affected by this. Either personally affected in our workplaces, affected in our schools, affected throughout the state. So if we want to go forward as a people in the state of Florida, we need elected officials who will stand here with you, with all of us, as sisters, as brothers and sisters, to fight this terrible scourge. And it's got to start from right here in Miami-Dade all the way up to our state capital in Tallahassee. Make our elected officials accountable. Don't let them get away with political speeches. Make sure they back up their speeches with laws. Laws that will give us unemployment compensation. Laws that will toughen up our criminal justice system so that those aggressors who are incarcerated stay incarcerated until the issues have been taken care of, so that the women, when they go back home, have a sense of security. You know, right now, I'm a criminal defense attorney. I used to be a prosecutor. When somebody is arrested on domestic violence, they go in, but they can bond out the next day. So you don't have a chance to take care of your family and to make sure that you're secure and to make sure that you have family to protect you. We've got to toughen up those criminal justice laws to keep those folks in jail until everything is safe for those of us at home. These guys get out the next morning. And how many women die with the papers in their hand against an injunction against violence? They die with it in their hands because we don't have the laws to bolster it up. So this is what we need, and we need legislators to stand with us. So all of us together, from this spot forward, all the way to Tallahassee, let's join together, all of us, to make sure that every legislature has our backs. So this will never, ever happen again to any woman, to any family, to any child here in the state of Florida.
As a survivor of domestic violence, I can tell you that economic security is vital in living an abusive relationship. It makes it so much easier when you know you can put food on your table, pay for your roof over your head and for you and your kids. to leave that relationship. Domestic violence is a very complex issue, and all institutions should work together to help to end the violence. Florida legislature should take action to allow survivors to collect unemployment when they have to leave their jobs due to no fault of their own. It's very difficult and frightening when you have to go to work and your abuser is calling you, threatening you and your coworkers. It's not only your life in danger, but the ones of your coworkers also. We have seen it happen many times. This is no joke, we're not making it up. The statistics show that it is true. We should have more education in schools so our boys, our girls can learn the early signs of domestic violence so that they're aware when something starts to happening, that they know what's next and they can stop it in time. We should have more health care, affordable housing. Those are things that make a big difference in the process of moving on with our lives. We, as Sisterhood of Survivors, are calling on all Floridians to work together so we can end the vicious cycle of domestic violence.